All right, Brenda, thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate it. Sorry about the tech difficulties there getting started, but I
Thank you so
appreciate
much for
it.
having
Was
me.
cool to see the little walkthrough into this room to see your clinic. It's quite a space, at least the one. This was just one of two clinics. So excited to dive
Yes.
into how you've gone from at-home personal training to multi-staff to clinic cash-based practice. I'm really pumped about this. So thank you so much for sharing your story today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to
Yeah.
talk today.
So yeah, let's start like usual with you just giving us a background on kind of what got you into PT and up to the point of deciding to start your own practice.
Sure. So I kind of going way back. I knew in high school that I wanted to do PT. Um, I think most of us have a similar story to some degree that we knew someone or went through PT ourselves. But for me, it was my dad tore his ACL racing motocross, which I then did myself like 2 years later. So going through that process was really what got me into it. Um, so went to PT school, graduated, and thought that I wanted to do peds, actually, like more youth sports, orthopedics, and took a job, worked for like 6 months, and decided this was not for me. It wasn't what I
Hmm.
wanted to do. Um, and so at the time, it was really challenging to find full time work in this area. And I had simultaneously been doing some personal training on the side to make some money during PT school. And so that's kind of when I launched the business. I had some extra time on my hands, being at home looking for work. So I started going to people's houses and doing personal training for them in home. And I did that for about 6 months. And then I rented a little tiny office space close to where we were living. And it was probably like, I don't know, 14 by 12 feet. It was just this tiny little space, and was working out of that. And I always had the idea that I wanted to use the personal training as kind of like a springboard into a practice. And originally, the vision I had in my head was very different. I thought I would do something kind of geared a little more sports based, maybe having like a gym with a PT office attached to it. And so, but I always was like, oh, well, I have to wait until, I open this big space, and you need all this room for all this equipment, right?
Hmm.
And my husband was the one that's like, well, why don't you just start treating people? You have an office space, just start treating. And I'm like, no, you have to, I felt like I had to have all the like shiny bells and whistles. And
Hmm.
that's actually when I came across you. And I was like Googling one night, like cash-based PT, because I'm like, I do not want to deal with insurance. Like, I already know that it's such a hassle, it's such a headache. Like, I don't want to do it. And I Googled it, and you were like the top hit. And I found your book, and I started, reading all of your um, articles, and I was listening to your podcast, and I read your book probably within like a day or two. And I was like, oh, this is, you know, could be realistic. Like, other people are doing this.
Yeah,
And so that's kind of how I got started. And
that's awesome.
yeah, just jumped in. So I have to say thanks for putting that out there and doing what you do, because otherwise I don't think I would be here today without that.
Oh, that's awesome to hear. And now that more and more of my podcast guests had started out kind of like that and found my stuff and some of my other good friends, it's just really heartwarming to hear that my work has had anything to do with all these successful cash practices and the freedoms that kind of go along with that. And you're a great example of really taking action, even in the midst of like some tough times to do so life wise. I'll just read this this one thing when I put the word out about, hey, I'm looking for podcast guests and a little bit about you. And since my first full-time clinic was open at the same time as building a house, and the second clinic was opened while 6 months pregnant. So apparently I do everything at once, or I like to know it's, and hasn't done it with a business loan or any debt. So that's fantastic, because you're up to multiple staff members, and we'll obviously dive into the details of that. So it was kind of like, if I'm hearing that right, you started with personal training, and then your husband said, why don't you just start treating patients? You did some search, found some of my stuff, and then they were like, all right, well, I've got the information now, I'm just going to go for it. Correct.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so what happened then?
Yeah, so I started seeing patients out of this little office space. I was there for maybe like a year and a half total. I think I probably was maybe seeing patients for like 6 months out of that time. And that's when I decided, okay, I'm ready to make the leap and have a larger clinic and make this my full-time job. Because at the time I was working full-time elsewhere. I would like see patients at my office in the morning, then go work full-time, come back to the office, see people at night, and just kind of hustle.
So you did have, at that point, you had found work, and were
Mm-hmm.
working. That's a lot of hustle. It's a lot of time.
Yeah, I probably did that for like 2 years.
Wow.
And I was, ready to make the jump. It's scary, I think, going out on your own, like full time. You're like, don't have that security blanket. But
Yeah.
so
What
found,
was it before, on that note? Because I know that this is, a lot of people do, they start their practice as a side hustle like you did, and they're working really hard, but eventually, not everyone, I guess, not all of those situations are like, say, a PRN thing where you can just like, okay, well, now I'm just doing 3 days a week. Now I'm doing 2, but it's like all or none. And in your situation, was it that you had to, like, when you went full time in your practice, did you go from like full time elsewhere and then just you were done and went 100% in your practice, or was it a gradual thing?
yeah. So I was working full time in a SNF
Mhm.
at that point, and so I kind of had a little bit of flexibility with that. Um, I also did like some home health too. So both of those settings, I feel like, give you a little more
Yeah.
flexibility to kind of come and go. And I really kind of cut my hours down as low as I could to like 30 or 32 a week, to still be considered like full time. And then when I, so I was kind of forced to make the jump. I was planning on doing the jump into my practice full time in like May of that year,
Mhm.
because we were building a house at the time, and I wanted to have, a paycheck to show for the bank to get my loan. And long story short, the company I worked for lost the contract with the facility. And so we were like all out of a job in March of that year. And I'm like, well, it doesn't pay to try to find something else for like 2 months.
Yeah.
So I made the jump a little bit sooner than I wanted, but my plan was to basically just go from full time, cut down to like PRN. And I still stayed on PRN, but I actually never really took work, because at that point the business kind of started taking off and I didn't really need to.
So it was a pretty full shift of, working relatively full time to not taking any of that work. So that's awesome. So how quickly was it that I mean, obviously you didn't have to pick up PRN work. I mean, were you immediately seeing multiple patients? Was it faster than you thought? Did it take longer than you thought?
Yeah, so I would say probably like the first 6 months. I mean, I've steadily grown throughout. It's been essentially 4 years since I went into the business full time. And yeah, probably like 6 months to a year. I would have liked to see faster growth. It still always grew, but I think until I made the decision to switch over and really niche down into women's health, that's when I really saw things kind of exponentially growing. Prior to that, I was so hesitant to do that because I still liked treating some of the orthopedic stuff, the sports-based things, and I was so worried to make that jump into just women's health. And looking back, I wish I would have done it sooner. I think it would have helped me grow faster. But yeah, I would say when I jumped into it full time, I had somewhat of an established caseload. So I was probably seeing maybe like 6 patients a week initially, and then probably went up to about like 30 a week within that.
30, you said?
Okay. Within probably like, yeah, somewhere 6 months to a year.
Are those full hour sessions we're talking?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good load for sure.
Yeah. So, and I kind of did like block time. I think my max was set for like 32 hours, 32 or 35 like patient hours a week initially. So
great. Well, that's actually, I mean, that's not a slow climb to go from, starting out and you had a handful to, about 30 within a year. That's solid. So at what point did you start to add staff or other services? I know you've got group fitness classes now. How did things evolve from that point of a year in and you're pretty booked yourself?
Yeah, once I moved into the space, I hired an admin person right off the bat to
Are you glad you did that in the very beginning?
I am. It was really difficult for me to add that first staff person. But I am glad I did it because it did free me up to, work on other things and really try to like expand the business versus just doing everything myself.
Yeah.
So I did add her, and it was like very part-time. I think she was maybe doing like 20 hours a week, if that. And initially started out with exercise classes as well. I was teaching all of them for the most part on the front end of starting the space, I guess, the bigger space. And I did the exercise classes for 2 reasons. One was to try to draw in new clients. And the second is to have a place for them to go come discharge. So, really trying to get that more of that small group training. And I feel like so many people, they have issues like back pain and they think, oh, well, I'm just going to go do yoga or Pilates or something to help my back. And they don't necessarily think of PT as that logical step. Yeah. So it did help us bring in a lot of new patients in that way.
So you're saying like by having that group class and just people saying, yeah, my back's been hurting, then it gave you the opportunity to say, well, that, we help with that as well.
Yeah.
So the first exposure to your brand and as a client for a lot of your early clients were actually through exercise classes.
Yeah, I would say less than 50%.
Okay. But that's still, I mean,
yeah.
Even if it's 10, 20%, that's significant. And I think, for a listener to think, well, what else, or I'd like the listeners to think what other services might, other than PT, might be, essentially like a flow of business into my PT service itself. So that's really cool that you started that right off the bat. Brilliant.
Yeah, we actually just totally revamped them too this summer because I felt like we were getting away from the initial thought or the initial purpose of the classes and getting too much into like just a regular exercise class. And I didn't want that. So we just completely changed things here probably within the last month or so, and kind of niched down our classes again and tried to make it a lot more personalized. That's been huge. They've been so much more successful since we've done that. And it is really carrying over with that like patient transfer, like intake and outtake, if you will.
Okay. So what was it that made you feel that your classes over time were getting away from their original purpose? What was that purpose, and how was that happening?
Yeah, I feel like at one point we almost got too big, and I started, I hired out a lot of different instructors so that I wasn't teaching anymore. So I essentially wasn't teaching a single class anymore, and we were at one point up to like 7 instructors. And part of it was on me because I don't think I did as good of a job training them to be uh, teaching a class that really aligned with our values in terms of having a safe place to exercise when maybe you are dealing with some of these issues or pelvic floor issues.
Mhm.
Because, for example, I don't know, someone with like a prolapse maybe really wouldn't do well in like a CrossFit or this
Sure.
really high intensity boot camp class. And so I think as things got, as I tried to take stuff off my plate and delegate and hire out, I think it just got to be too much. And we started losing the attendance. The people coming into class weren't kind of like our ideal client anymore.
Mhm.
And just kind of treating it as, oh, just a regular exercise class that you would go take anywhere.
Yeah.
And we lost that um, expertise that, well, you're here at a physical therapy clinic. There's a reason, we're different than the gym down the street.
Mhm.
So I think that's kind of where I don't know, lost it a little bit, and then kind of circled back and brought it, tighten things up a little bit more.
Great lesson learned. I mean, it's a common thing I think with growth of the more staff you have, and the more chances for things to slip through the cracks. That if you don't have repeating systems in place to train them over and over, not just once in the beginning, it's not going to be the way that you would deliver it yourself. And
Yeah.
so it's good that you guys recognize that. So in what ways did you revamp it and correct on those things?
So we actually lost a couple of instructors over the summer for various reasons. And so it kind of made me sit back and think like, okay, what do we need to do to get things back on track? Um, and it's an idea that I've toyed with for a while and just haven't pulled the trigger. And so with losing the instructors and having to kind of uh, put things back on my plate, if you will, I was like, okay, how can we do this to make it a little more skilled almost, and almost having the classes kind of be another service offering. So, for example, we just started one that's geared for pre and postpartum,
Mhm.
and almost using it as, we have clients that really want to come see us for therapy, but cost is a big issue for them, and they really legitimately cannot find the money at that time. Um, and so the class is kind of a way that we can offer some expertise and keep them here within the business,
Yeah.
and kind of continue building that relationship. So that was my thought process moving forward with them.
Nice, very good. And so if we kind of go back to where we left off on how things were taking off around, you got a new space, you started out doing your personal training classes along with the PT services, and you also hired an admin who was kind of part-time-ish at the time. Take us from there. What happened next?
Yeah. So she worked for me for about a year, and then uh, by fluke, she was going to have to take some time off to help a family member after surgery. And so my mom was actually going to just fill in, help me out a little bit. Long story short, the lady I had working for me decided to like stay out in California, and was gone for like 6 months. And so I had totally trained my mom, and we decided to keep my mom on full time. And so once my mom joined me, I was able to delegate so much more. I just felt like there was a level of trust that I didn't have with the other person. I was able to put so much more onto her and take it off my plate that I think it really helped us grow because I could focus on it. So that was huge. And then we were kind of at a point, I had added another PT in because I was at full capacity. So I added another PT as staff, and then
Pelvic health specialist.
she wasn't initially, but then, yeah, I sent her through all the courses to do that. And probably, so it was 2 years at the one office in Hills Corners, when I was kind of thinking like, what are our next steps? I had space at that office to maybe have one other PT added in, because we have 3 treatment rooms there and potential that we could maybe build out a 4th. And so at the time, I have a pretty good relationship with the owner of a birth center in town here. And she called me up one day and said, hey, there's this office space. Do you want to come look at it? And I thought originally she was talking within her birth center. And I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? It's something I've toyed with because they're a really big referral source for us. Mm-hmm. And it turns out it wasn't in the birth center, it's above them, and it's this like huge office suite, like 2,500 square feet. And I'm like, I can't do this. Like, are you insane? I was like 5 or 6 months pregnant at the time, and like a month later I was signing the lease on it. So it's a little crazy.
So what were the decision points, or were the points that made you feel like, okay, I can do this, it makes sense to grab this space?
Yeah. So really, I think, I mean, don't get me wrong, I could have stayed at my current location and done that for probably a couple more years before expanding out. But the opportunity to be so close to the birth center like that, and it's in a different suburb, if you will, from the Milwaukee area. So it's a completely different demographic. Mm-hmm. And I just thought that it would make so much sense to have the 2 locations. You're working different demographics, and now we're so close to the birth center that really will help us grow even more. And so doing the second location, I feel like was a stretch at the time, especially because I had just added a staff PT probably not even 6 months prior to that. And but the thought was, okay, well, now we'll have 2 locations. I have a PT in place, so we can have one at one office, one at the other, and grow from there.
And did the numbers, as you looked at, okay, I need and she needs to be seeing this many patients to cover overhead, like, was it a really high number? Was it a situation, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, was it a situation where you felt like you really needed to get to another PT quickly, or was the overhead still manageable enough where you could do it just between the 2 of you and still remain profitable?
Yeah, what we were doing in terms of revenue at the one office covered the whole overhead of the second office. Okay. So when I looked at it, I'm like, we could essentially stay exactly where we are right now and still be profitable. So I'm like, yes, it's a big step to add another space like that and take on that risk and the overhead, but we were already doing enough to cover it. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, and with adding it, you're only going to go up from there. So yeah, I felt like we could make it work. Mm-hmm. It just would be, we would just have to put in that effort to try to grow it then, but we were at least like, would be breaking even if that, worst case scenario.
And with the new space, obviously it's a lot more space in the moment that you needed. How did you go about filling that space and trying to, maximize the revenue you produce there?
Yeah, I ended up subleasing part of it. It took me a little while and it kind of fell in my lap. And so I ended up subleasing part of the space to a plastic surgeon that does a lot of like cosmetic work. And so they rent essentially like 2.5 rooms from me. And
Cool.
that was huge. That
Yeah.
was like a huge burden off of me. Originally I wasn't going to because I just didn't want to have to deal with the hassle of subleasers. But when we opened, I was like 6 months pregnant. And a week before my due date, this is with baby number one, my PT gave notice. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like the worst day ever. What am I going to do? I have 2 offices and now no PT, and I'm supposed to like deliver a baby in a week. So,
Wow. Wow.
um,
Not to laugh, but
yeah, that
goodness.
was crazy. That was so
All
that
right.
was like
So how did you
why.
get through that? Tell us about that.
Oh my gosh, I don't know how I got through that. She agreed to stay on for a month, and that's when I was like, okay, I'm going to sublease part of this space to help offset the rent.
Mhm.
I literally like got the signed sublease. I was at the hospital in labor. I got the signed sublease.
Wow.
So I had it all worked out with her of like what they were moving in, where they were moving it, like prior to delivery, because I'm like, I'm going to be on maternity leave.
God,
So
God.
my PT, she worked for me for like a month. I came back at like 5 weeks postpartum because I didn't really have a choice.
Mhm.
And I had to cover both offices. So that was challenging. But definitely a learning experience for me. And, uh, with hiring, and I was totally blindsided. I like did not see that one coming at all.
Mhm.
And I'm glad that she agreed to stay on for a month. Felt fortunate that she did that, but we did have issues like me being out of the office then, um, have issues with her essentially like poaching patients.
She was
Um,
starting her own practice.
Yeah, she actually was like doing some massage work on the side,
Mhm.
and she started like discharging patients super early and then having them come see her for massage,
Mhm.
or she'd cut someone's frequency from like twice a week all the way down to like once a month and supplement with massage. We had like data breach issues where she was like logging into our software, taking client information to
Wow.
reach out. So huge learning curve for me on how to handle when you have employees leave, how to handle that, and that you can't always just trust people and think that everyone like has your back.
Yeah. So what would be some of the takeaway points that you'd give everyone else out there about how to handle that, and also maybe anything that you would do differently leading up to it just to be prepared for the inevitable? Because it's going to happen to every business owner that has employees. People are going to leave for one reason or another. How do you set,
Yeah,
what things would you give, as advice, having gone through that?
yeah. I feel like so many people have told me, oh, well, did you have a non-compete? And it's like, what is a non-compete going to do?
Right.
Um, one of the big things I would say is, change your passwords on your software. Like you have someone like that's leaving, that might be something you need to do to protect your client information.
Mhm.
Um, I try to be like as transparent as possible with our staff and be as open. But I definitely feel like I do kind of hold a little closer to the heart some of my bigger strategy moves, if you will,
Mhm.
um, because I feel like you never know what someone's going to do with that information. So I don't know. I don't know if that's the right answer, but
Mhm.
it's kind of what happened for me.
How quickly were you able to find and onboard someone else to take their place?
Yeah. I probably looked for about, mm, it was probably about like 6 months or so. I interviewed a lot of pelvic floor PTs. It was probably, it was like, I think about 9 months when Jen started with us then. So she was kind of a really good fit with all the others I had interviewed. And I was kind of, I don't know, gun shy, if you will, to hire another pelvic floor PT after how things ended with the first.
Mm-hmm.
And I really dragged my feet, and I had a really hard time making a decision because I didn't trust myself in making a good decision. And then when I found her, like everything just kind of clicked and fell into place. And I'm like, okay, this is how things are supposed to be. Like, this is, this is how it's like a good decision.
Yeah.
And I'm one, I guess when I hire staff, my take is always like, yes, you have to have a base thing of skill set, but you have to have the personality and the people skills, because otherwise, like, that's not something you can train. You can't teach some of that stuff. Some of the skills you can teach, that you can enhance it, whatever, but they have to be a right fit personality wise, and the right fit for all the rest of the staff too. When you're talking, you have multiple staff. So yeah, she started, we're coming up on a year here in November. But when I did her second interview, she told me she was pregnant at the time. And I was like, oh shoot, because then I was pregnant with the second one also. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I thought that I would have this PT like cover my maternity leave. And
gosh,
so we've had like, one of my other staff members was also pregnant. So we literally had March, April, May babies. It was crazy. It was totally nuts here. So I'm hoping that now, we're just gonna like kind of get our feet on the ground and like
man, wow. This is, I mean, talk about adversity and, unforeseen or maybe partially foreseen instances, but the fact that y'all push through it all is amazing. And if you've got the time, I forgot to ask you earlier on, do you need to leave at the top of the hour or anything? Okay.
No, I'm good.
I've got 1,000 questions in my head. I'm sure listeners do as well, about how you made it through that, still have multiple staff, 2 clinic locations. Obviously that subleasing a big part of the other space was huge. And I'm sure you're very glad that you were able to get that done before giving birth. But covering 2 locations while interviewing for that second PT for 9 months with a newborn. And it sounds like at some point in that space, you were also realized you were pregnant with your second. It's like, hats off. Oh my God. I think about some of the tough times in my past couple of years, and I'm feeling like I don't have anything to complain about. But the fact that you got through that is really awesome. So you went ahead because it was a great personality fit, and probably because you had interviewed so many others and saw, what a not great personality fit felt like. You went ahead and said, let's do it, even though you knew she had some maternity leave coming up around this time. Did y'all's maternity leave overlap such that you didn't have anyone able to see patients other than just the group classes?
Yeah. So originally she was due like mid-March, and I was due the beginning of May. So I thought, okay, well, we might be looking at like a 2-week overlap here before, that we might not have coverage. But she ended up going like 2 weeks late. And so we had like a month, like the whole month of May, we didn't have a PT to work at the office. So it wasn't ideal. And I went back and forth. Do I hire like a temp person? I just felt that with our clients, and I saw this with my first maternity leave. I don't know if it's the same in other settings, but especially women's health, it's such you have a lot different relationship with your patients that they really aren't comfortable just seeing somebody else
Sure.
or seeing a fill-in. And I thought it's not even going to be worthwhile for me to try to bring somebody in for a month. Um, so I just planned on not having coverage for a month, and we worked with our patients' frequencies to try to kind of go over that gap. And I mean, the nice thing with pelvic floor in some sense, it's not like an acute injury that you're like, oh,
Yeah.
I have to see them twice a week or 3 times a week or something. You know, it's okay if you kind of space them a little bit for certain things. So that helped. But yeah, it was really stressful coming into it because I'm like, we're going to have a month of no sales, no
Gosh.
revenue.
I mean, not that you have to get too detailed with numbers, but had you, did you have kind of savings from, prior prosperous times that got you through
Mhm.
that? How did you get through that? Because I mean, I know personally, there are plenty of practices out there that if they went with zero sales because they have a decent overhead like that for a month, that could be enough to kind of do them in.
Yeah. So, I mean, luckily with a pregnancy, you kind of have some lead time to plan and anticipate that. So I pretty much just started stockpiling money in the savings account, and kind of, I was very conservative with like what we're spending on expenses. Like, we're not doing any big projects. We're not buying new equipment, like nothing. Um, Trying to really tighten up the budget. And I'm conservative to begin with the money for the business. I kind of take that approach like, well, if I don't have the money to
Mhm.
spend on something, I'm not doing it in the business because I don't want to start taking on debt. um, and so I am hesitant to spend a lot oftentimes within the business itself. So yeah, we started stockpiling money, and I'm like, this will hopefully like get us through that gap. We also had like our exercise classes going, so we brought in a little bit from that. But then the other thing that we did leading up to it was, because it was May, we kind of did like a Mother's Day special where we sold like a 3-pack of PT visits at a
Mhm.
pretty good discount and sent it out via email. And we actually sold like several packages. So we brought in probably like, I don't know, at least $1,500, $2,000, like just from selling some packages. So it at least helped get us through that to some degree. But yeah, I mean, May was like hardly anything. And then June, uh, Jen was back like part-time, and I think I came back like at the end of June. So June wasn't even like a full month for us, still much lower in revenue.
Mhm.
Um, so
I mean, that's so
yeah.
cool to have. I mean, I guess, the takeaways for listeners would be, pre-planning and also there's going to be situations for sure when you don't have 9 months to plan or 10 months or whatever it is, and to kind of plan for the unexpected in the first place, as
Mm-hmm.
far as having savings, backup, lines of credit, et cetera. And
Yeah.
then, having ways to, even if knowing we're seeing patients, that you could still make money. And in this case, just selling packages. Hey, well, we're going to come back strong here in a few weeks. And, who wants a discounted Mother's Day special? Or that's brilliant. And the fact that you have an email list, that you've collected that and that you keep them active and engaged so that you could get that many sales. Because my guess is that you guys were already emailing that list. If you got multiple package sales, it wasn't like you send that list of clients one email a year and all of a sudden you get a bunch of sales. Am I correct on that?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
'Cause-
Yeah,
So yeah, I
sorry.
was just going to say just the importance of staying engaged with your customers via email, via social media, via the ways that you'll promote your practice or any other things to help fill in those gaps is huge. And then of course, having other cash-based services outside of PT to fill in the
Mm-hmm.
gaps as well with your exercise classes. So you guys played that really well. Could have been, I mean, it was extremely difficult, but it could have been really devastating to a lot of businesses I know that
Mm-hmm.
didn't have those other things in place. So well done.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it helps too to point out that we also kind of strategized our marketing plan. So like we did a lot of stuff like right before my maternity leave, like workshops. I don't remember what we all did, but we did some stuff knowing that like, okay, typically it takes us, maybe 2 weeks to like convert someone. Like when we do a workshop, like maybe average time is about 2 weeks to convert them, and then it's not a big deal to then schedule like, okay, well, your eval is going to be in 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
No one thinks anything of it. And most people had no idea that the office was even essentially closed.
Nice.
So, and then also planning to like do a bunch right when we got back to almost like space out our leads.
Cool. So let's, we've gone all this way and getting this incredible story and really hadn't even dove into how you guys have generated your patients other than your point earlier that you credit a lot of the growth and patient flow to going niche, niching down into women's health. So aside from just having that niche, how, what are the top level, strategies that have really paid off biggest for your practice?
Yeah, so we try to do like a workshop once a month at the office. That is a pretty big generator for us. So typically the goal I set is I like to try to have around 10 people in a workshop. Our conversion rate off of our workshops is really high, like 80-90%.
So when you say
There's workshops.
Like you mean like conversion to a paying customer or conversion to
Yeah.
a free consultation or?
To a paying customer.
Okay, I want to know about that.
Yeah,
I want to know exactly
that's
what
been
that
our
workshop looks like. break
I
it
don't know.
down.
It's taken a lot to tweak that and get that right. But so with
I'd
our
say you got it
workshops,
pretty right.
I kind of like went outside of the PT realm, if you will, and kind of studied some other marketers and what they do when they do workshops. And I think everyone struggles when they do a workshop with like how much do you give away and how much do you hold on to? Because you want to give away enough content that people feel like they really got something out of it. Because I feel like we've probably all done like the webinars or the workshops where you're like, I just sat here for like an hour and like got nothing. Like it just, except for a sales pitch.
Yeah.
Everyone comes into a workshop knowing that you're probably going to pitch them something. And so really focusing on the education, giving them the content, but then also showing how, like in my realm, so many people think, oh, well, if you have a diastasis, like you're just going to do these ab exercises. Really showing why like exercise isn't just the only answer, like why it might need that hands-on approach. Or a really, I think, successful tactic for me with pelvic floor is explaining how so many people have issues with an overactive pelvic floor and shouldn't be doing Kegels. And I'll actually have them do a self demo on can they contract, can they relax? And if they can't or they don't know, there's a good chance that things are maybe overactive, and that just doing exercises is actually going to make it worse. And I think that really helps people see like, oh, there's so much more to like just doing exercises. And most people coming into the workshops have probably already tried doing some stuff on their own at home and it's not better. So showing like where that PT aspect fits into it and why it's important. And then I always like finish my workshop with some like exercises with the disclaimer of like, these might not be the ones for you. And then I read somewhere that you always should like ask permission to essentially like pitch them a sales pitch, because otherwise like you don't want to go on and on and on about, do XYZ and then, oh, hey, come see me for PT, because automatically people will like get defensive right away if you like transition gears into a sales pitch. And so the biggest way that I do it is when I get to the point where I'm going to start teaching some exercises, I always say, I'm going to kind of walk you through a couple things that you can do on your own. But then if it's okay with you, I'll talk a little bit about a way that will get you maybe long-term results or help you get better faster. If that's okay, that we can talk about that and then move forward. And then I always end with PT and a free consult. So the other thing is we always like pass out slips then at that point to get contact info so we can do the follow-up versus just relying on them too. And I try to encourage people to like book the consult that night if they're interested in doing that. Otherwise, they get put into like an automated follow-up email sequence, and typically most will convert and book that free consult within like 2 weeks of the workshop. And then when we do the consult, we block like an hour for our 30-minute consults and try to just convert them into the eval right away that day.
Oh, okay. Okay. Interesting. So there was a lot of information there. I just kind of want to try to recap as well as kind of pick into some of the details. So making them highly informative and useful for one, and maybe if possible, depending on the person that's listening, your niche, if there's a way that you can have them do some sort of like test or contraction or range of motion or something that makes them very aware that they have a problem that you can help with.
Yes, I think that's huge.
And then this idea of saying, so if it's okay with you, I'd like to tell you about XYZ. And I think that, it probably sounds like something that most people would be like, maybe a little uncomfortable to do. But to me, if I put myself in that audience, if someone's just spent, 30, 45 minutes giving me really useful information and shown me that I have an issue that they can help with, when they say, and if it's okay, I'd like to tell you how PT can help, like in my mind, it's an automatic, well, yeah, of course. I mean, you're helping me out for free right now. Of course you can tell me about PT. But probably, I'm guessing from wherever you read that, it's based on, because I really get into like decision-making and sales psychology, it's based on some sort of subconscious trigger that if you can get them to say, yes, it's okay to tell me about that, the chance of converting them into at least a free consultation is much, much higher, as evidenced by your all's 80 or 90%. That's like, I don't know if you understand how big that is, but that's huge. It's a huge.
I've had workshops where I've converted like 100%, and I'm like,
fantastic.
I go home and celebrate on those nights.
I mean, I don't do a ton of workshops right now in my practice, but I obviously coach a lot of people on those and teach a lot about how to convert at a high rate, and that's really one of the highest I've heard of, and that's fantastic. So then going from there, at the you're essentially collecting information. And I love that you do have a handwritten, little postcard or something like that. I have one mastermind student that he literally sits them in their seats. And it was a really cool story. Like he was going back to give an informational, workshop of some sort to the same exact group of people in his niche at like a skilled nursing facility or something. And the first time he did it, and this is like just a month later, but the first time he did it, he had like a little clipboard for people to sign up, to get more information or have this little free report or whatever, lead magnet or something like that. And literally no one signed up for it. The next week, just by putting the card in the seat and with a pen, every single one of them filled it out.
Yeah.
I mean, just the difference is the same audience, right?
Yeah.
probably similar-ish, maybe a different topic, but still, similar type of presentation. So
Sure.
that makes a huge difference, I think, for people to just, it's like right there where they're going to be sitting. That's awesome, because then you can follow up. Now, I'd love to hear a little bit more about for the, like, how do you add any scarcity or anything to get people to sign up on the spot? And then secondly, if they don't, because I know we've done that at a lot of our presentations where we'll say, we've got 5 spots at, for free, or if we're doing a promo, it's $75 if you sign up now. It's going to go up to $99 if you book it after today, something like that. But do you do any scarcity on the front end? And then I'd love to hear more about what that follow-up sequence looks like that they go into if they don't book.
Yeah, I don't. I've tried it with workshops. I've tried buying a package or some kind of discounted like eval fee, and haven't been as successful with it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Cash-Based Practice Podcast. If you liked what you heard here today, we have some extremely important things we want to send you. First, a quick start guide to cash-based physical therapy and Medicare. This free ebook will provide the primary rules and regulations surrounding this confusing but important topic. Secondly, we want to share with you the 5 characteristics common to all successful cash-based practices. Find out the vital things Jarod has learned from years of interviewing cash practice owners and running his own successful cash practice. As one of our listeners, we want to give you all this information absolutely free. You can get it right now by going to drjarodcarter.com/success. Again, that's drjarodcarter.com/success. Go there now to get your copies, and we'll see you next time.